Next paragraph, how you doing? We're ranking combat arts today. Unlike my prosthetics video, I'll cover all the combat arts in detail this time because there's only 18 combat arts compared to like the 40-something prosthetic tools. I'd also like to mention that while prosthetics fill various roles and purposes, you know, sort of like a multi-tool, combat arts really only serve to deal more damage, so they're very much more of a hammer kind of option. That's not to say that they're bad, that's just that they're not as helpful as your prosthetic tools in most cases. So, like, I'd really only consider 3 of them not worth using at all. It does mean as well that we're going to be using some different criteria for this video, and it's going to be a little harsh. I'm just letting you know right up front. And in the spirit of being harsh, the rankings will go from my personal top 3 to seasonal depression. So the criteria are: Number 1, versus bosses. The biggest roadblocks in Souls games are bosses, doubly so for Sekiro since you can reasonably stealth or run past mob encounters. So being able to dish out damage like vitality, posture, chip, all that, staggering, and being able to deal with perilous attacks, those are all going to be really highly prized. Number 2, cost effectiveness. Prosthetic tools and ninjutsu are the best abilities to spend spirit emblems on in just about every situation. It's kind of like comparing hammers to multi-tools, like I said, so any art that costs emblems will be highly scrutinized. Number 3, buffs. This was not really a factor in my prosthetic tools video because it didn't matter. Sugars were the only thing that affected them. With the Kusabi Maru though, and combat art, you have many more buffs such as Bestowal, Living Weapon, Divine Confetti, things like that. And of course, sugars, so that's very much a major factor in this ranking. Number 4, utility. Weapon arts that provide more than just damage, that are more than just hammers, are going to be ranked higher. Mobility, personal advantage, positional advantage, stagger, and other effects, those are going to be taken into account too. Number 5, availability. So, since we're covering far fewer items in this video, we can afford to factor in how early each art can be obtained, and how many skill points are needed to obtain them, both specifically and cumulatively. This won't have a lot of impact on higher rankings, but it will keep the more useful early game arts from being pushed too far down the list for being redundant. All this testing was done in New Game Plus 5, with the Charmless and Demon Bell activated. Enemies had much higher posture, and some combat arts really fell off in the higher difficulties. Please keep that in mind. I also referenced damage numbers for combat arts and buffs in this video, which I pulled all from the Sekiro Fextra Life and some helpful Reddit posts, and I will link both of those down in the description. And keep in mind, most of those numbers are only approximation. Alright, starting off strong with Ashina Cross. You would think that a keystone skill, this is the keystone combat art for the Ashina Arts skill tree, you would think this would be a lot better, but it's not. It's really depression inducing. Let's start off with what it does right. Vitality damage, posture damage, and stagger, they're solid. Being able to hold your attack is pretty nifty too for catching some enemies in small attack windows. There is also a bit of a windup, and it's also nice being able to dodge or block out of the windup at any point in time, a courtesy some other arts don't allow. Now what it does wrong. This will get overshadowed so quickly in the late game in damage, in stagger, in function. There's just not anything this does exceptionally well. Even its range is medium. It ultimately ends up underperforming for acquiring 16 total skill points, which makes it the second most expensive of the other keystone combat arts. It's also got a 2 spirit emblem price tag, which is a very rough spot to be in since there are so many good prosthetics and arts in this range. If Ashina Cross had cost just 1 emblem less, I could honestly consider it for C or B tier, but as it is now, I just get kind of sad using it. Alright, I'd like to jump around a little bit and talk about some of these in pairs, because it's kind of relevant since a lot of these act the same or are just upgrades to each other. So, next one up is One Mind. I'm actually going to put this in A tier. I feel like this combat art goes a little underappreciated, and for 3 emblems, I can understand why. I see where you're coming from. You get this from going through the Shura ending, but I wouldn't recommend that for anyone's first ending because you miss out on upgrade materials, prayer beads, basically half the game. This has the same startup as Ashina Cross and kind of serves the same purpose but with some extra advantages. It has the added benefit of doing pretty solid posture damage with a decently sized arc. That makes One Mind one of the few true crowd control arts. But this doesn't mean much for us in this video because crowd control doesn't really exist in Sekiro, and we're mainly focusing on bosses. Its real power is how much damage the invisible slashes do, bypassing blocks and blowing up posture because of the number of attacks. The full combo does more vitality and posture damage than any other combat art, and the first half can be looped by dodging after the initial attack, which stun locks some bosses, including the final boss of the Cherne ending. You normally won't want to miss that last attack though, as it does a sizable amount of posture damage. The downsides are that it acts pretty much like Ashina Cross. The sheathing animation is a little slow, but you can dodge out of it at any point in time or block out of it. It does also have that 3 spirit emblem cost that makes it a little restrictive to use, and you are slightly locked in place after the initial attack. Also, it's pretty useless without emblems, and only 2 hits out of the combo benefit from sword buffs. Not meta by any means, but incredibly useful in some surprising situations. Also, charging this midair does not significantly reduce the charge time. Why I put one mine above Ashina Cross is very simple. Ashina Cross cannot handle a boss by itself. One mind can handle some bosses entirely by itself. So if there's a boss that you don't want to deal with, all you have to do is death blow it and then spam one mind to get that last health bar off. It's that simple. Okay, next up on the list, Praying Strikes. So this is a mid-game combat art. It does very quick posture damage and some light stagger, but it does so little vitality damage. And for being mid-game, I feel like there's not a lot there to appreciate. There are plenty of bosses that recover posture fast enough to completely nullify posture-focused attacks like this unless you take off a chunk of their health first. You can even spam this at some normal mobs that block well and see 0 progress. To be a little fair, it only takes 2 skill points to buy Praying Strikes, and it doesn't use spirit emblems on top of how easy it is to spam this. However, you have to first get to Senpou Temple before you get access to the Temple Arts tree, meaning you are almost guaranteed to have other basic but much more effective combat arts than this one by the time you get there. The final nail in the coffin for this art is that it does not benefit from sword buffs, so using something like Divine Confetti will 100% be counterproductive if you have this art equipped. Other minor gripes are its short range, can't deal with mob groups, and it looks really stupid midair. Alright, since we talked about Praying Strikes, let's talk about its big brother, Praying Strikes Exorcism. Exorcism. I promise I'm trying. This is another mid-game combat art that adds 1 extra hit to the end of Praying Strikes for a specific skill point cost of 3 and a cumulative cost of 5. It's not pricey by any means, and still 0 spirit emblems to use. The final shoulder bash actually does more posture damage than the first 2 hits combined, and actually does some vitality damage too, which is a big step up from Praying Strikes. You can even charge this to use just the final shoulder bash by itself, but it's still really short range, and I can think of many things I'd rather take the time to charge up. It's technically better than its predecessor, kinda fun, but still pretty meh for all the exact same reasons. I really only want to use the charged shoulder bash to stagger bosses out of attacks I don't like. Surprisingly works well if you charge it midair though, since you land literally right on top of your enemy. Praying Strikes Exorcism gets 2 ranks above Praying Strikes, simply because it actually does vitality damage, it does stun lock, and it does really good stagger. You can actually stagger some bosses out of really hyper armor heavy attacks. It's not the best, but I can still reasonably use this to some good effect. Okay, our final one for seasonal depression, Nightjar Slash. I know, some people are probably going to hate on me for this too, but I don't care. I am the sole decider of what is good on this channel, thank you very much. So this is our first truly early game combat art. This is honestly great for staying at range and punishing whiffs, or even countering sweep attacks, provided you're on flat ground and can get the timing right. Someone better than me could probably also pull off lightning reversals with Nightjar Slash, but I imagine it needs a lot of situational advantage, and more patience than I have. The damage is on the lower end, however, and the stagger is non-existent, but if you're using this for damage, then you're not doing it right. Sadly, there aren't many follow-up options that don't rely on prosthetic tools besides just running away or actually fighting the boss. This ultimately ended up at the bottom because aside from punishing whiffs or gap closing, both of which you can do just fine without this art, there's not much use to it outside of not costing emblems and only being 3 cumulative skill points. Can be used midair to pretty decent effect, but I've rarely wanted to. I don't think it's a bad art at all, I just think it's not the best, and it doesn't offer a lot of utility or damage. Not great for higher levels. And you know what we're going to talk about next. We're going to talk about Nightjar slash reversal. Again, another one that's just a straight upgrade, but gets a 2 rank boost. So coming in at 10 cumulative skill points and 0 emblems per use, this mid-game skill adds a retreating attack to the Nightjar toolbox. Just this addition adds so much value. The aforementioned lack of follow-up options was part of what kept Nightjar Slash from being a more interesting attack, and being able to jump in and out of combat at such a long range ups this art's spam potential to silly levels. You could use only this art and some kiting against most bosses and not have to actually learn their fight, provided you have some patience, because it will take forever to kill them. The damage still isn't high by any means, and there's a chance to be clipped on the reversal slash depending on what attack the enemy uses, but the control you have over the flow of combat with this 0 spirit emblem art is incredibly fun and safe to abuse. Okay, let's move on up and focus on the C tier. First one is Dragon Flash. So this is the only truly ranged combat art that you get in the game, and you get it from any ending other than the Shura ending. I'm not gonna lie to you, I really want to rank this a little higher, but I can't bring myself to do so. Let me explain what I mean. It has some utility in that you can one-shot trash mobs or spam elite enemies from an effectively infinite range. This is because the charged shockwave does roughly 70% of the total damage, but this number can increase with the size of your enemy. So the most damage you can get out of this is on a boss like the Guardian Ape, which doesn't block and is a chungus at point blank range. This can be dicey because of the long charge time that you can't dodge out of, followed by the long recovery animation. You can use this mid-air, but the damage is most assuredly not the same, and you lose out on the larger shockwave, which means having situational advantage is a must to get the most out of this combat art. Despite that, it can rival the damage of Empowered Mortal Draw under the right circumstances, and can be incredibly effective against groups. And these can all be from a safe distance for 2 emblems, so it can be good, trust me. Some other slight downsides that keep it from B tier and up are only applying sword buffs to the first slash, only doing as much damage as one normal attack with 0 emblems, but mostly it really is just how awkward this combat art is to land a fully charged attack with. Okay, and actually the final one for C tier, there's only 2 for this. Where is it? I just saw it. Whirlwind Slash. So this is the first combat art that you would have available in the game, and it's surprisingly not the worst. It's definitely better than Nightjar Slash. It's very straightforward too. A smidge of crowd control, a little chip damage, slightly harder hitting than 2 normal attacks, and it's completely free to use. Just don't expect to leverage this art well against anything with poise. It will be a bad time. As a bonus, it's also decently spammable, often adding 1 extra hit to your combos, and can be used mid-air to okay effect. Not awful, but you will end up swapping this for something better down the line. It's still heaps better than Praying Strikes though, I'm gonna be honest. And it's only 1 skill point. Okay, bear with me, we're gonna make some leaps over the next few arts. So since we're talking about Whirlwind Slash, let's talk about Floating Passage. This may seem expensive because of the carp scale cost. It doesn't cost skill points, you need 5 carp scales to get it. And again, that may seem steep, but you actually get enough carp scales throughout 1 new game cycle to buy every single carp scale item. And most of the other carp scale items available to you in the early game are better when there's skill points and enemies using fire aplenty. The reason why we're talking about this now is it's essentially the extravagant cousin of Whirlwind Slash, but with 75% less crowd control in exchange for 250% more hits and 705% more damage. I'm confident that math isn't correct. It's also decently spammable, with great status proc ability, does good chip damage, and can be bought as early as Senpou Temple. Now why this gets a B tier is because it can be such a wrecking force because of the Pistol Ninjutsu, which adds an additive damage buff to your sword. That's roughly 3/4 as strong as a normal attack. So this is really effective because that flat buff is going to do some work over the 5-hit combo of Floating Passage. And because this is so effective at stun locking bosses that block your every attack, you can absolutely do some work if you happen to get a death blow on something before you go into a boss room. And this costs nothing to use, which is super helpful since Pistol is like 7 emblems. Alternatively, you can use this with the Living Weapon art to apply burn in 1 combo. Fun fact, Living Weapon applies a flat sword buff that looks to be half as strong as Pistol. Overall, this is solid for just exploring, not terribly hard to obtain, and can wreck health bars under the right buff circumstances. I do want to point out that Divine Confetti also increases this art's chip damage, making it very useful against bosses like Orin of the Water. Alright, one more jump, hold on. Spiral Cloud Passage. This gets an S rank. Now, you remember how I said Floating Passage is like Whirlwind Slash's extravagant cousin? Spiral Cloud Passage is like Floating Passage's meth head uncle. This is another very late game skill that you're probably going to get in New Game Plus 1, and one that I think a lot of people don't quite understand. It does not provide a lot of stagger. The chip and posture damage are decent. You need 3 emblems for the full combo. Worst of all, the mobility is lacking. Where does this combat art shine then to put it in the S tier? It has amazing potential to dump out damage. Floating Passage really is good at taking advantage of flat damage buffs and proccing. Spiral Cloud Passage just takes that to 11. And speaking of proccing, Living Weapon turns this into a 1 pulse burn proc, which means that you get to land the rest of the combo completely uncontested. And because Spiral Cloud Passage has a 9-hit combo, Bestowal is best put on this one. Divine Confetti is probably the best consistent buff for this art though, as it seems to apply its 25% damage bonus to the shockwaves of Spiral Cloud, translating into even more chip damage. Even unbuffed, this art is great at keeping enemies backpedaling, and the number of hits means that posture damage can stack up nicely. Now, while 3 emblems may make this combo seem costly, it's actually one of the cheapest and fastest ways to destroy half a boss's health bar without Mortal Blade. And the wide slashing arcs and shockwaves also mean that you can use this for some quick burst damage against groups. Relatively cheap, moderate universal utility, and outstanding niche capabilities really make me believe that this skill is slept on for higher difficulties and is just mostly misunderstood. So hopefully it's beginning to sink in now how important buffs are to the rankings in this video. Floating Passage and Spiral Cloud, that's a 2-rank difference because Spiral Cloud uses buffs so much more efficiently. Moving on though, another one for B tier that I actually absolutely love this one, SHADOWFALL. The keystone art for the Shinobi skill tree, I think? And arguably it is way better than the other 2 keystone combat arts, despite being 21 whole skill points to unlock. For 2 emblems, you get great range, high stagger, an unblockable stab, respectable vitality damage, and this art offers a wide range of follow-up options. The damage is comparatively low, even with the 2 normal mid-air attacks you can land as a follow-up, but the safety and mobility of this art make up for it. The biggest downside is the most damaging follow-up is a mid-air loaded axe, a 4-spirit emblem combo, but also a fantastic combo nonetheless. The other drawbacks are the 2-spirit emblem cost. Again, it's a pretty rough cost bracket, and honestly, in a boss fight, a better use of 2 spirit emblems would be firecrackers into an Ichimonji. There's also times where the enemy can dodge this attack, but if it doesn't connect, then you don't lose spirit emblems, so this is kind of a non-issue. Stagger and safety alone make this such a great combat art even with 0 emblems. Finally, I'd like to talk in depth about the 21 skill point cost. I know it seems steep, especially since it's 5 points over Ashina Cross, but this is a reasonable mid-game price tag. You've probably noticed that each skill point takes more experience to earn than the last. This increase is temporary until those skill points are spent, at which point the game logs those points and permanently increases the experience needed until your next skill point. The increases are pretty linear until about 25 skill points, where it becomes exponential, so your first 21 skill points are very achievable, making the larger cost of this combat art not so important in regards to the keystone arts. Okay, rant over, next art. Okay, I'm just gonna throw these up at the same time because I'm sure this is probably going to be the most controversial take that I have in the whole video. High Monk. Nope. High Monk. There we go. High Monk's going to go in the B tier. Senpou Leaping Kicks is going to go in the A tier. So let's start with Senpou Leaping Kicks. The best part of this art is how great it is at punishing sweeping perilous attacks. It will literally track the enemy for you, so as soon as you see a sweep, it's as easy as turning your brain off and using this bad boy. There's also a decent amount of stagger damage from that initial kick, but don't expect it to work all the time. Otherwise, it shares similarities with praying strikes in that it does great posture damage, but poor vitality damage. It also trivializes lightning reversals, and you should always use a tool or art to do this, since just jumping can sometimes bite you in the ass. But for sweeping attacks, you might still be better off learning to jump on your enemy and using Ichimonji midair. The combination of easy to use, mobility, 0 spirit emblem cost, and mid-game access, and ever important lightning reversals is really what gives this a high ranking. It doesn't benefit from sword buffs though, and at the very least it's very cool looking midair. So now let's go over High Monk. The last of the keystone combat arts, this time from the Temple Arts tree. 0 emblems per use, 12 cumulative skill points to purchase, all for adding some extra hits at the end of Senpou Leaping Kicks. this is technically better than simple leaping kicks, let me just say that, but here are the reasons why it's lower. The first being that this and its lesser version both serve the same purpose, to punish sweep attacks and for lightning reversals. Second, the attacks at the end of the combo that actually use Sekiro's sword are the only ones that do good vitality damage. That is, if the enemy doesn't block or hyper armor through your long combo. The final and most pivotal point is how much easier it is to just buy leaping kicks, which costs a whole 4 cumulative skill points less. With all this in mind, yeah, I'm gonna say leaping kicks is better. You can get it a lot sooner. Both of them serve the same purpose. This is a no-brainer to me. Okay, so I just realized a mistake that I made. I put SHADOWFALL in B tier. That was meant to be SHADOWRUSH, its lesser version. Nobody crucify me for that mistake, please. But while we're on the topic, let's talk about SHADOWFALL. This gets an S tier right away. This is a straight upgrade to SHADOWRUSH, and honestly, just the additional 2 airborne hits at the end, it just makes this so good. Remember how I said SHADOWRUSH's best follow-up is the Shinobi Axe? This solves that. And those additional attacks do great posture damage, are wide enough to use against a tight group, and safely since SHADOWRUSH starts at range at no additional emblem cost. Did I mention that the additional attacks also make this incredibly spammable? Probably one of the most satisfying and ninja-looking attacks you can dish out. Downside, you're probably going to get this on your second playthrough, as it requires both Ashina Cross and SHADOWRUSH, both keystone skills, to purchase it from the Mushin tree, which takes work to unlock as well. So the reason I didn't talk about these two in tandem is because SHADOWFALL is just one of my favorites, and I kind of want to gush about it real quick. The amount of combo potential that you have with this makes the game so much more interesting. Even after you finish it the first time, you can still use SHADOWFALL and find new combos with different prosthetic tools or other items to set up, and the ability to just spam this is great. It does enough damage to where you can use this and take off an entire health bar from a boss with it. Alright, next up on our list, and I'm pretty sure everyone saw this coming, Ichimonji is definitely an S tier early game combat art. It is the last of the early combat arts that you can get, and definitely the best of that group. If you're new to the game, I can't recommend enough that you get familiar with this combat art, because while the medium range and long charge time can make it tricky to use at first, it can be your best friend for boss fights. Great posture damage, great vitality damage, staggers almost everything, and can be used as a sweep counter combo. It's good even uncharged, and you restore your own posture when you use this attack, all for no emblems and a 2 skill point investment. You really can't ask for more from a free combat art, and you should definitely use this mid-air because it reduces the charge time and hits about the same. So keep that in mind when buying this, that you're probably going to want to work towards the mid-air combat art skill as well. I really don't feel like I have to defend why Ichimonji gets an S tier, which means I really don't have to defend why Ichimonji Double gets one of my personal top 3 spots. Just think of everything that makes Ichimonji great and then double it. And that extra hit still restores posture and still costs 0 emblems. Easy top 3, easy clap. And I'm sure the next set of combat arts everybody saw coming too, but Mortal Draw, S tier. Let's talk about it. It's just the game's nuclear option. The 3 spirit emblem cost, 6 for the full combo is completely justified and balanced, which says a lot because that's an expensive price tag. It will stagger just about anything, has a very long reach, deals out silly amounts of damage with a high percentage of chip damage, and it still hits great even with no emblems, making it fantastic for spamming. The slow use time can be made more bearable by using it mid-air, and it has a wide range, meaning you can absolutely use this for some crowd control and kiting. There's only 2 real downsides to it. 1, it's only unlocked mid-game and goes away at the start of each new game cycle, and 2, it also doesn't benefit from sword buffs. Regardless, when you get this the first time, it will most likely make the game a lot easier for you. Short of lightning reversals and sweep counters, this is just about everything you could want out of a combat art that uses emblems. And of course, since we talked about Mortal Draw, let's talk about empowered Mortal Draw. What could make Mortal Draw better? Beefier damage. Yet again, another straight upgrade at no additional cost to you. You probably won't unlock this until your second playthrough, and that's not really an issue since this is the most powerful 2-hit combo you can land in the game, albeit for a steep 6 emblem cost. You should definitely be using this mid-air as it lowers the charge time and outputs about the same amount of damage. Interestingly, you shouldn't bother charging this version of Mortal Draw unless you have enough spirit emblems because there's no benefit compared to an uncharged attack. Best combat art in the game no matter how you look at it. So honestly, out of all of the combat arts that you can just get normally normally through the game, the ones that cost spirit emblems anyway. Anything that comes from the Mushin tree is going to be your best friend, and honestly it doesn't even make sense to spend emblems on most other combat arts as soon as you get these. Anything that's still considered early game can be usable as well. Whirlwind Slash is a great example of that, as it can be leveraged pretty decently against some bosses. I'd also like to specifically give a honorable mention to Nightjar Slash Reversal, just because this almost made it in the A tier. It was very nearly up there, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it because while it does add an insane amount of utility and mobility to your game and playstyle, there are other arts that can do the same thing but safer, albeit at somewhat of a cost or just by used midair. Okay, my final combat art for the top 3. Sakura Dance. And honestly, I think this is what I'd consider to be my favorite personal combat art in the whole game. This is the hardest one to get to because you must complete the Divine Air Gauntlet of Strength, which means taking on Inner Genichiro. Once you do though, you get good stagger, great posture and vitality damage with chip damage, brain dead lightning and sweep counters. Actually, this move dodges most attacks with how high you leap into the air, and you end the combo in the air, setting you up for even more follow-up options. Let's see what else. A wide attack arc that can hit groups, completely spammable, and all for the cost of 1 emblem. This is my go-to for quick and safe trash mob clearing just because it's so effective and mobile. 3 hits is also fantastic for getting mileage out of Bestowal and Living Weapon and Divine Confetti. You still also get the full utility of this move without emblems, but the damage will fall off. The only warning I would like to give with this weapon is that it doesn't do amazing stagger, so there are some poise heavy attacks that you'll want to avoid using this against, especially if someone uses a vertical attack. Honestly, in my top 3 here, these are the only combat arts that you'd really need for the game. I can't think of anything that you would want for just switching between these. Empowered Mortal Draw for sheer damage and spam, Ichimonji Double for just walking around or recovering posture, and Sakura Dance for amazing counters and just general avoidance. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. This honestly took me a lot longer to make than I thought it would. I think I rewrote my script maybe 4 or 5 times, and I actually redid this presentation as well, all because I really just couldn't sleep well at night knowing that I made a subpar ranking list that didn't reflect accurately how I feel about the combat arts in the game. So let me know what you thought down in the comments. Let me know if you agree or disagree with anything I have to say. I know some of you are gonna rip me a new ass. And please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps out the channel and it really puts a smile on my face. Don't you want to see my face smile? Well, you gotta work for it. You gotta work for it. But why can't I just end my videos normally? Fuck. God. Okay. Bye.